In the wake of the murder of Charlie Kirk, the Christian political activist, I've found myself wondering, how come Hindu youth in the West don't mobilize for their faith in the way that Christian youth have been doing for Christianity or Jesus Christ? How come we never see videos on social media of massive worship or praise events led by Hindu youth in the West inside some grand temple? Like, we never see those kinds of videos. And believe me, the temples have plenty of space for that. Just look at the newer Baroque, lavish Hindu temple in New Jersey. Space is definitely not an issue for Hindu youth in the West. To be clear, the lack of mobilization amongst Hindu youth in the West that I'm referring to is not for or within the context of politics or political activism. I'm simply referring to mobilization for the faith itself, a collective activism not for political or societal change, but rather for the religion itself, for Hinduism. I mean, how about just large and regular worship or praise youth events for Hinduism itself? That's all I'm talking about. That's all I'm asking for. We certainly lack them in the West. A Pew Research report from 2021 showed 77% of Indian Hindus believe in karma, but only a minority emphasize temple attendance or prayer as essential. Many youth see it as a quote-unquote social construct rather than some sort of divine mandate, from the heavens. When I realized that this study focused on Hindu youth living in India, I said to myself, now, if many Hindu youth in a rather conservative country have this viewpoint about temple attendance and worship and prayer, active worship, then what hope is there for the Hindu youth living in the largely liberal and secular West? Like, what hope is there for them mobilizing for Hinduism in the manner Christian youth has for Jesus in the West? Hinduism is often celebrated for its inclusive philosophy, summed up beautifully sometimes in the saying, truth is one, paths are many to God, right? Truth is one, paths are many to that truth. This ethos fosters acceptance of diverse beliefs, unlike what some might refer to as the missionary zeal of Christianity or the quote-unquote one true faith narrative, my God is the best narrative found in other Abrahamic traditions. So some might argue this tolerance, amongst Hindus for other religions makes Hinduism less mobilization prone. But it would be a big mistake to believe that Hinduism does not call for mobilization when we have plenty of stories from Hindu scriptures that show various gods and demigods mobilizing for the purpose of spreading goodness, spreading truth, spreading wise knowledge. Hindu scriptures are filled with stories of gods and demigods, like Lord Rama, Krishna, Indra, and Goddess Durga, mobilizing to spread goodness and restore balance, to restore truth, to propagate truth as well, the wise knowledge. Just think of the Ramayana, where Rama rallies an army to defeat Ravana, or the Mahabharata, where Krishna guides the Pandavas to uphold Dharma, and while doing so, there are some very profound, very popular, very profound spiritual discourses that occur while he is guiding the Pandavas, to uphold Dharma and going into war. Think about the Hindu myths in which all different godly avatars grant the female face of God, or Devi, as I like to refer to her in my book, Who God Really Is, their most cherished weapons. These different godly avatars they offer up Devi, their most cherished weapons for her to use in battle against demonic forces. And yet, it's so extremely rare to see large Hindu youth gatherings in the West for Hinduism itself. Surveys have shown that Hindu youth tend to relate Hinduism more with personal spirituality rather than collective activism. And that's, I think, I think a lot of people, even if they're not raised Hindu, they tend to, when they get introduced to Hinduism, when they consider Hinduism, they tend to look at it as a religion more for personal spirituality, maybe a religion that you use scriptures and mythologies of which that you use on a more a personal individual basis, maybe in solitude. So mobilization, even collective activism is not often, it's not the idea you associate with Hinduism as you think of Hinduism, right? You don't associate that kind of collectivism with Hinduism. However, let's not fool ourselves, into believing that the massive worship gatherings and events from Christian youth and Turning Point USA that we've been seeing promoted on social media recently are void of the goal of personal spirituality, discovery, and development. They're not. Let's not fool ourselves into believing that socio-political change and activism are the primary goals of faith mobilization instead of personal spiritual development. No doubt, Christian youth have been congregating in massive numbers, especially for the purpose of personal spiritual development. So this choice that Hindu youth in the West believe exists between personal spirituality and collective activism is a false one. There is no choice here. There is not an either-or circumstance or paradigm here. Hindu youth, if and when they mobilize in large worship events, would do so not just for the broader praise of the Hindu faith, but also for personal spiritual development, okay? You can have personal spiritual development occurring in these large worship or praise mobilization events, faith mobilization events. But I'm not surprised that there is an either-or thought paradigm at play here when it comes to how the young Hindu should relate with Hinduism. An August 2024 climate activism study noted that Indian parents in India prioritize quote-unquote academic and career success over extracurriculars like activism, leading many youth to basically drop or abandon voluntary work in climate activism, which actually, by the way, many now refer to as a religion of its own. But again, I'm unsurprised, basically, because I have many personal anecdotes of Hindu parents here in the West stressing a focus on career development, mainstream school education, science and mathematics over volunteer and spiritual religious activities in their children. Hindu parents in the West have raised, plenty of doctors, lawyers, engineers, but let's face it, being a doctor, lawyer, C-suite executive, or engineer doesn't automatically make one wise. Wisdom is lacking amongst many millennial and Gen Z Hindus, many of whom relate with Hinduism superficially and only when the top 2 or 3 popular holiday festivals come around each year, like Diwali, Holi, and maybe Raksha Bandhan. This gap between, let's say, intelligence and wisdom becomes most evident in relationship struggles and failed marriages amongst young Hindus in the West. As I explore in my book, Who God Really Is, God is all about relationship building. Therefore, achieving self-mastery by way of God allows us to be successful relationship builders. If you've been listening to this podcast daily or weekly, you can tell by now that whether it's our connection to the divine, to each other, or to ourselves, Hinduism's teachings offer profound insights for navigating love, romance, family, and community in the postmodern world. But if we don't pass down the why behind our Hindu mythology and rituals, we risk remaining blind to the wisdom that I share in my book, Who God Really Is, which of course I encourage all of you to grab on Amazon.com. I'd encourage Hindu parents and grandparents to start integrating family discussions of Hindu stories with their young children. When a tradition is introduced and carried out well, it's one that stays with the children well into adulthood. When a tradition is introduced thoughtfully and meaningfully as a family routine, it sticks. It becomes part of who the children are well into adulthood. If it's done right from the start, it won't be abandoned later. I'm actually a Hindu who attended a Catholic school for 9 years. My parents believed that attending a private elementary school would help me grow up with a better head on my shoulders than would the public school system in America. I guess they turned out to be right because, looking back, I guess they did turn out to be right because I turned out all right. But when I think about my experiences in Catholic school, I noticed something striking. Catholic parents I knew were consistent. They regularly discussed faith, shared stories about Jesus, and explained why their rituals mattered to their children, like, baptism, the 7 sacraments, like confession, taking the Eucharist. So there was a sense of purpose, a deeper connection to their faith traditions in comparison to how Hinduism was introduced to me and most of the Hindu kids I grew up around. Hindu parents tended to focus more on the what and the basic why than the deep why. My parents would tell me to offer this milk or this fruit to God and pray and ask for money, good grades in school, a new home, a new brother, light this diya and take part in this arti. But there was no knowledge shared with me from my parents as to why, like the deep why, something that goes beyond just, good versus evil. God always has to win over the demons. Besides that, there was nothing more. Like, why do we as humans, as more than just Hindus, need to engage in these ritualistic and sacrificial activities? Of course, I discuss the nature of sacrifice and how important it is when we are meant to and really should be increasing our likeness to God in my book, Who God Really Is. But this is a book I wrote in adulthood, well into adulthood, so I really did not know why we engaged in sacrificial activities like giving some fruit to God, donating money at the temple, honoring God with milk, with some oil, with holy water, like offering these items to God. Why? What is the meaning of that sacrifice? How does it help me? That's what I didn't learn. And, how does the light from the diya or that act of sacrifice really, really help me? I did not know. The explanations were missing in my parents, just as they were with pretty much all of the other Hindu parents we socialized with. And when it came to famous stories from the Ramayana, for example, sure, I was told that Ravana was evil and Rama was good and the evil demons had to and are always defeated by God. But that's it. Like, what I'm saying? Is that really all there is to the meaning of these intricate Hindu scripture characters? Of course not. Of course not. And if you've been listening to this podcast or if you've read my books, you realize, yep, that's true. Of course not. There's more to God than just good versus evil. This brings me to a broader observation. Many Hindu parents in the West don't fully grasp the essence of why they themselves perform Hindu rituals for God. And I know I might get some pushback or flack for this, but hear me out. How many Hindu parents have studied the scholarly knowledge behind Lord Shiva, Goddess Durga, Lord Rama, or Krishna? How many make it a priority to sit down with their toddlers or teens every week to discuss stories from Hinduism or Hindu mythology? Like, do they know the deeper significance, again, of lighting diyas on Diwali or the intricacies of the story behind Holi? Do they understand what Lord Shiva specifically represents in relation to universal forces and the creation of the universe? More importantly, do Hindu parents know themselves how the major principles of Hinduism are to be applied to postmodern world situations? Principles like dharma, karma, ahimsa, to start with. And finally, and most importantly, do they live by the core observations and principles of Hinduism as an example for their children? Hindu youth need quite a push in the right direction to encourage them to mobilize in large numbers, find commonalities amongst each other, and introduce newcomers to Hinduism via their mobilization. That's the fact of the matter. That's where we are with Hinduism and youth who grow up in Hindu families in the West. That's all for today's episode of Naked Hindu Tales. If you enjoyed this reflection, check out my book, Who God Really Is, on Amazon.com. Leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and ask me any spiritual or non-spiritual question you have there. I'll be sure to answer your question in a future episode for the benefit of all. I'll have another interesting and useful reflection from Hinduism or concerning Hinduism for you tomorrow. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak with you in the next episode.